Hey, Steve Mignani here doing the junkyard crawl at Bernardston Auto Wrecking in Bernardston, Massachusetts with a 1962 Rambler Classic Deluxe. Now, you got to remember, 1962 was a very good year for American Motors. In fact, they sold a total of 442,344 cars, which was 20% up over 61. You got to remember, the economy car thing was big in the late 50s, early 60s, but by 64, 65, the Mustang, the Falcon Sprint, the Corvair Monza started to make AMC cars look pretty stodgy. By 1967, American Motors was that close to bankruptcy. But for the early 60s, when George Romney, the head of American Motors, famously said, the only race American Motors cares about is the human race. Forget the Daytona 500, the Indy 500, or the Winter Nationals at Pomona. AMC was not in racing. They were about building utilitarian cars like this classic. And here's the thing, a lot of folks remember the Rambler American, I should say, a little tiny car. Well, they only accounted for 28% of all sales. A full 64% of American Motor sales in 62 were mid-sized cars like this Classic. Now, the Classic was available in 3 series, the Deluxe, the Custom, and the 400. And the big difference beyond some trim was the engine. The base car, the Deluxe, and the Custom came with a 195 cubic inch 6-banger. The top level 400 had an aluminum block. Now, this one here is an iron block. So again, this is not one of the Custom 400 series. The aluminum motor was optional in the base and the Deluxe and the Custom, but here we see the iron engine. Again, it's a 6, it's 195 cubic inches, and this one has been hit in the front. See how the harmonic damper is fractured right here, so something whacked this car in the nose apparently at some point. But look at these motor mounts, dinky little hockey pucks of rubber right there. The engine kind of floats on them, or does it? These things wear out and the engine eventually starts rattling against the frame member right there. But this thing was once Arctic silver metallic, and it's still looking pretty decent right here. And again, this is the last year for this styling cycle. And one thing we don't see here but is present, 62 is the first year for dual circuit master cylinders on AMC cars, beating Uncle Sam by a full 5 years when federal regulations in 67 said dual circuits on all cars. But we can see the remnants of the brake hoses right here, 1, 2, which would have come out the side of the dual circuit master. So again, Cadillac, Studebaker, and Rambler all had dual circuit brakes in 62. So this one here, again, let's walk around this puppy. And this is, again, it's a 4-door. It's a sedan with fixed pillars, A and B. But something that very uniquely American Motors is this, the extruded aluminum upper door frames, the window frames right here. This is a one-piece structure right here. It gave the car a shiny, bright look without the need for additional stainless steel clip-on stuff. And again, this body shell here went from 1956 to 1962, a long run. And again, look at the details on this thing. The roof rack on this is definitely an add-on, but look at this, the suction cups right here and the little canvas straps. So some frugal chap probably had his suitcase or something on top of this. Again, the aftermarket roof rack, kind of a cool thing on this one. Now we'll change positions here, Shane, come on in, and we'll see on this one. This one would have had a push-button automatic transmission. And again, the pod would have been right here. Very similar to Chrysler in that it was a cable-operated transmission, had the buttons right in this spot here. But the tranny itself was a Borg-Warner cast iron unit. Not a bad tranny, but not exactly modern. This one was a radio delete car. Look at that. We can see the look of the receiver and some fake buttons in those 2 circles. But if you didn't pay the money for the radio, that's what you got. And to its right, that was the clock block-off plate. Kind of gave you the idea of a clock, but if you try and read time on that thing, well, good luck. Hubcaps are still inside this thing, kind of cool. These are the base hubcaps. They are still there in red. That's how they were. Most of the time you find these hubcaps, that's bleached out and you don't really see it, but that's the red that would have been on these things from day one when it was new. And here is Car Life magazine right here from October of 61. And this is a little profile on the Rambler Classic Super. Let's have a peek inside. This one has the aluminum engine, but before we get to that, it says here, Rambler advertising has made much of the fact that these seats convert readily to beds. We'll talk about that in a second, the beds for roadside naps. Not so, we say. Your nap would be mighty uncomfortable. Any sort of fully horizontal position requires much wrestling with strange levers and plug-ins. The rear seat bottom must be pulled up and laid against the seat back. What are we talking about there? Well, let's go here and have a look at Rambler's fold down seats. There it is right there, reclining seats. So it's not exactly flat, but you know, the idea is there. Great on prom night. But anyway, here we have the aluminum engine right there. That's the aluminum six-banger in the 400 series. And again, this car, this test is a 61. So we'll see the aluminum block right there, made by the National Lead Division of Dulles Jarver. And I've actually dealt with a few of these blocks. They're kind of like the Mopar aluminum Slant 6, and also fatally flawed by integrally cast cylinder liners, which are kind of bad news when they start to corrode. But here we have 61 final year for the tail fins. We see them right here. And of course, this 62 is going to have a different tail. So let's have a look at that. And come around to the back of this thing, we can see that the tail fins are gone. Again, final year here, 62 for the styling cycle and 56 through 62. But AMC rounded things off, nubbed down the tail fin, went with a round tail light here. And the trunk lid on this thing has been salvaged, but we see here again the original silver frost metallic paint looking pretty good. And here's one of those seats that kind of sort of folds down inside. And yeah, if you want, Shane, you head on back over to the driver's side front, and I'll meet you over there. There's some cool stuff inside this car we can continue to look at. Yeah, and of course, AMC was very safety conscious during all times. We can see in this one here, seat belts. Look at this, standard seat belts on AMCs, but these are kind of generic. If you look at them, they basically have a one-size-fits-all. It's an aluminum clasp or hasp, or what we want to call that, but look how it's basically canvas, almost like out of an airplane, like a Piper Cub. But again, front and rear seatbelt, standard equipment in AMC cars. Again, you know, George Romney, the only race we care about is the human race, keeping you alive rather than, you know, selling you 0 to 60. And speaking of which, this is the American Motors X-Ray. This is basically what you might call a piece of factory propaganda, if you will. It's a hit piece, and this is from 1960, a couple years before this car was new, but the message is there. And they're comparing the American Motors vehicles with the other full-size cars from Detroit. And we can see right here we have Ford, Chevy, Plymouth, and at the bottom right there's that beautiful little Rambler. And AMC, you know, they're in there punching, and AMC was selling the heck out of these cars. And here's a little piece right here showing Detroit dinosaurs, how big and how useless and how wasteful they are, whereas a little Rambler is smaller and smarter. They would have you believe. Now, of course, by 1964, 5, 6, there was nothing squarer, literally and figuratively, than a Rambler. But here we have all the different engine possibilities. They're busting on the V8 engines Detroit was using, but they did have an optional little V8. We can see it there in that circle. And of course, the six bangers. The aluminum engine, kind of neat. And here's the push rods. It was not a flathead. It was truly an overhead valve. Not a bad little piece. And this is the automatic transmission Borg Warner with the Telovac control unit right there, which is the shifter. 1-barrel or 2-barrel carburetors. And they're even getting down on, you know, the angle at the back. They're trying to say that the bigger Detroit cars would have a scraped rear bumper. Not so with the Rambler. Look at that. So it's kind of a hit piece, if you will. And here's all this info. Now, American Motors actually released these things from 58 on up, just so that salesmen and customers could better compare their cars. But here's the thing. The unit construction on AMC cars, 56 up, actually into the 50s on up, was different from the body on frame that you see. But here they do acknowledge that Plymouth and Dart in 1960 went to a semi-unitized right there. Kind of, sort of. The roll bar, not so much. But Ford and Chevrolet both were still body on frame. Chrysler was kind of halfway there. But again, these factory hit pieces to help make something out of nothing, I have to say. But something about this that's kind of neat, on the right front corner is the suspension. And it's a double-edged sword. This is what AMC called their deep coil ride. Now, if we look at that, we'll trade spots here, Shane. I'll come to your right. Look at this, tiny little drums. These are 9-inch drums right here. In fact, smallest in the business. Now the cars were light, not horrible, but look at this. This is the deep coil ride. The coil spring right here rides on top of the, this is called the trunnion and the upper control arm or lower. So AMC was trying to tell you that this gave you a softer ride. It did. However, if you hit a curb with this stuff tended to fold. It wasn't that strong. But here's the thing about these, it's kind of tough. Right inside of here, when you turn the wheel, there's a thing called a trunnion right in there. It's basically a bearing that takes the entire weight of the car. So when you turn the wheel, this doesn't turn, but that does right there. Those wear out. You get yourself a sloppy riding car. And changing the trunnion, you ask any AMC mechanic, it was not a lot of fun. But again, the junkyard is equally classroom as it is museum, if you will. And a nice cutaway like that shows us AMC's deep coil ride. So that's the story of the 1962 Rambler Classic Deluxe. Not a 400. If it was, we'd see that aluminum block, which is pretty cool. But again, they were problematic because they tended to rot from the inside and the head gasket would fail. They had an open deck. Not such a good design in the long run. But back in 1962, it was cutting edge stuff. In fact, AMC stuck with the aluminum six-banger through 64. A couple years after Chrysler got out of that game. But anyway, that's the story again of the American Motors Classic and how it was basically the big seller in AMC for 1962, even more so than the little American Rambler American compact car. So if you like this video, be sure to subscribe to the Steve Mags YouTube channel and ring the bell so that you know when the next video comes out, which is tomorrow morning.